Wonderful introduction. I'm just checking that everyone can see my screen okay. And can I just check with you, Claudia, that everyone can see my screen? Yeah, okay, perfect. So first of all, hello everyone, and welcome to today's session, which has been hosted by Positive Luxury. This session basically forms the first of a series of new webinars discussing issues surrounding sustainability. Just again, so my name is Fflur Roberts and I am head of the luxury goods industry at Euromonitor International. But before I start today, I'd just like to thank Positive Luxury for inviting us to be part of this new Circle or the Circle series, and just to say how excited we are about this new project that they are running. So as Claudia said, at the end of the session, there will be some time for a short Q&A session. So just to give you an overview of today's presentation, consumer activism, behavioral changes and technology are all forcing companies to rethink almost every business model. And it's becoming increasingly difficult for luxury players to keep up with competitors and understand how the industry is evolving. In today's presentation, I hope to explore some of these forces at play and look at the key disruptors in luxury now and in the next few years. Look at how demands from the mature digital consumer, but the consumer overall, are being met by the key players. And ultimately, how these are all changing the way that luxury does business. So if we start off by looking at the industry overall, by the end of last year, global sales exceeded the $1 trillion mark. And as we can see here, online clearly continues to gain ground with around 14% growth in the last 5 years. But as the boundaries between digital and store-based channels become even more blurred, we can see an impressive 271% growth in transactions taking place through mobile, which, as I'm sure you would all agree, is extremely impressive. So if we look at performance overall in the global industry across the 10 years that we kind of review the luxury industry, the last 5 years have thrown up some of the toughest trading conditions that the industry has ever seen. But there are signs that the tides are turning. That said, investors remain cautious as many geopolitical and economic risks remain. Global sales, nevertheless, grew by around 4% last year, and as we can see here in the chart, we expect similar growth rates this year at around 5% growth moving forward. So looking at the key regions, Asia Pacific leads in global sales overall with a massive $400 billion by the end of last year. And we should probably note here that China's luxury goods spending alone makes up 68% of Asia Pacific sales and an estimated 28% of all global spending. Second largest region, Western Europe, lagged in 2018 or last year, mainly due to the strong euro, which of course is affecting purchasing power from wealthy tourists, but also political instability and security issues around key markets and obviously key luxury shopping destinations and cities in Western Europe are also having an impact in this regard. If we look at the actual regional performance in some of the key regions, again, as we can see here, Asia Pacific appears strong with around 9% growth. And again, most of this was driven by China. The developed regions of Western Europe and North America were, however, significantly weaker. Both regions showed a slight slowdown for the year, or for 2018, with North America actually in negative real growth, if we look at the growth in real terms. That said, the poor results of these developed regions really should not obscure their importance, as the world's top 5 developed markets still account for almost 50% of all global luxury goods sales. We should also note that the developing regions of Eastern Europe and Latin America performed somewhat better in the last few years, or last year in particular, as Russia saw an uptick in sales following the political instability there and a ban on travel from both Russia and other countries around the world. But also we've seen a much better or a much brighter outlook for Brazil, and Brazil in particular has returned to some growth somewhat. So if we move to look at the key luxury categories driving this growth, as we can see, historically, performance was driven by luxury food service, cars, hotels, leather goods, and beauty. But moving forward, as digital expands further, sales will clearly be driven by luxury consumer electronics, with cars remaining in second place. But whilst these two categories will remain the fastest growing overall, we expect luxury hotels and other luxury services to increase in importance as consumers continue to look towards more experiences over things. Indeed, more and more luxury is becoming less about material goods and more about acquiring meaningful experiences. And crucially, what we're seeing really is that the concept of luxury as a status symbol is being replaced by that of a status experience. So looking at some of the other trends that are affecting the markets, of course, luxury shopping continues to be a major driver for many wealthy tourists and, of course, greatly influences the luxury markets. Total spending on luxury goods from tourists last year increased by over 70%, sorry, not last year, in the last 5 years, increased by 7%. Whilst this might not seem huge, it is actually of particular note, as many key shopping destinations like Paris and New York recorded poor tourism flows in the last 5 years. And again, this is mainly owing to fluctuating exchange rates, but also security issues. Nevertheless, the US still accounts for almost half of all international spending. And despite talk of a slowdown that we're hearing about the Chinese tourists, but also China overall, the Chinese remain the biggest single international spender in the world, making up over a quarter of all tourist spending on personal luxury goods. So looking at where these tourists are actually coming from, if we look at the weight of travel flows from our latest travel data, once again, we can see that on a global level, China is set to overtake the US and Germany to be the world's largest source of outbound tourism by 2023. Of course, this spells good news for the luxury retailers, given the Chinese love of luxury and, of course, luxury shopping. But this also spells good news for luxury hospitality, as we're clearly seeing shifts in or changes in the profile of the Chinese tourist. Amongst others, they are traveling alone as opposed to in big tour groups that we have traditionally seen. But probably the most important thing to note here is that with this, they are making their own decisions when it comes to accommodations, and may choose a luxury hotel over maybe a mid-priced hotel that we have traditionally seen over the last few years. And really just to highlight the true weight of spending in some of the key luxury markets from the Chinese consumer, this chart here shows the percentage of international spend from Chinese tourists. So as we can see here in markets like Hong Kong, for example, they account for almost all of international sales. And again, this really just highlights their power when it comes to luxury spending, but maybe more importantly, it just highlights their sheer growth when it comes to wealth expansion. Moving forward, the Chinese consumer overall will remain a key nationality driving growth overall in the luxury industry. So maybe looking at other areas or the bigger picture when it comes to wealth, what do we actually know about these wealthy consumers? Well, first and foremost, whilst the wealthy consumer makes up less than 1% of the world's population, they now command over half of global wealth. But with this rate of expansion or wealth expansion, it's becoming increasingly challenging for luxury brands to profile today's luxury consumer. In particular, they all define luxury in very different ways. At added to that, they are all looking for very different experiences and self-discovery that is completely relevant and unique to them. So knowing what they want or even need is even more of a challenge. But what we are seeing, particularly from luxury players, is that more and more they are targeting demographic groups, or there's a shift from targeting demographic groups based on traditional ideas that they may historically have had on luxury to psychographic profiles based more on personal lifestyle. And we see that this is definitely a way that these key players will move going forward, looking more at lifestyles as opposed to traditional ideas about luxury. So moving on to some of the bigger forces at play, we have identified 4 broad trends and drivers that are disrupting the luxury market. These are shifting market frontiers, sustainability, digital drivers, and the experience more trend. And broadly speaking, these are all being driven by shifting economic power, technology, population change, environmental shifts and pressures, and of course, and maybe most importantly, changing consumer values. So if we start off by looking at the impact of shifting market frontiers, globalization has brought around many changes in developing countries, and it's had a major impact on the luxury landscape. Luxury companies will increasingly see their revenue coming from Asia, the underdeveloped African markets, and Latin America. The newly wealthy are clearly the frontier market for the industry and a key driver of growth. But that said, this growth comes at a high price to our planet, and the need for sustainability is clearly rising. But with this, resources outside our planet may need to be found to meet our ever-growing needs. So just looking at some examples here, those with very deep pockets are even looking outside our planet as a travel destination. And probably to date, you can't get a more unique trip than one that takes you to the moon. So whilst we're seeing shifts overall in market frontiers, which is obviously having a huge impact on luxury sales and luxury consumers overall, the likes of SpaceX is planning to take 2 passengers to the final frontier in the next 4 to 5 years. But at a cost of around 35 million US dollars per ticket, it's definitely aimed at the ultra wealthy consumer. So moving on to sustainability, of course, we're all, I'm sure, especially everyone connected to positive luxury sees this as probably the most important area, or one of the most important areas or disruptors in the luxury market today and moving forward. But sustainability clearly is another major trend shaping the industry. With a huge rise of global wealth, luxury is becoming a financial possibility for many consumers. Whilst, of course, this brings huge benefits to the industry overall, it's putting increasing pressure on natural habitats and highlights the importance of sustainable luxury across the board. Moving forward, with over 60% of consumers in a recent survey that we carried out stating that they are concerned about climate change, it will become increasingly important for luxury companies and key players around the world to be completely transparent about their ethical stances and show that they care about the planet and its people. So maybe looking at some other issues surrounding climate change, with thousands of protesters, or any one of you that has visited London in the last couple of weeks or lives in London will be very familiar with the rebellion extinction protests that have been hitting London streets in the last couple of weeks. So possibly this slide that I'm showing you now comes at a very relevant time at the moment. So as we can see here in the chart, according to our latest travel data, the numbers of trips globally will exceed 2 billion in the next 4 years. But with this, environmental pressures will also continue to rise. By 2030, 61% of the global population will live in urban areas. And with this growth, or this rapid growth in urbanization, as well as huge growth that we're seeing in the cars or the automotive industry and industrialization, air pollution is also an ever-growing problem across the world. But whilst, for many years we've just talked about air pollution in Asia, particularly in China or key cities in China, this is actually now becoming a global issue. All in all, this is putting increasing pressure on our planet and its species, and really highlights the importance of sustainable tourism moving forward. And looking at some examples here, some of you may be familiar with the wonderful work that Stephen Webster does, but just to use his wonderful example here, better use, reuse and recycling is the mantra of the circular economy. And many luxury players today are now exploring a broad range of opportunities in this area, and it's becoming increasingly a trend that we're seeing in the retail industry overall. However, one industry that lends itself very well to the upsell market is the jewellery industry, because of course precious metals can be smelted and gems can be repolished. And here, just in this example here, the jewellery designer Stephen Webster has seen huge success in his new repurposed model, which has now actually become an integral part of their business strategy. Moving on to the issue of digital and the connected consumer, and looking at the role that digital plays here, for the first time in history, a majority of the global population are connected, and there are over 5 billion mobile phone users today. This continues to play a huge role in the evolution of society. It has given consumers greater convenience, simplicity, and above all, knowledge. Indeed, data itself is now a commodity, and as such, the world's most valuable companies are no longer the likes of Coca-Cola or McDonald's, but Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and Amazon. Social media, of course, plays an essential role here and has been hugely impactful in the luxury industry. But what sets the wealthy consumer, if we are concentrating on luxury, what sets them apart from the rest of the world is the fact that they have the resources to actually live out their social media dreams. And with this, it has created a more demanding consumer that looks beyond experiences alone. So just looking closer at this issue and looking at the issue surrounding technology, staying relevant has never been harder. Come tomorrow, what it takes to win today will already have changed. Based on a survey that we carried out looking at technologies that are set to have the biggest impact on the way that we do business, as we can see here in the charts, artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things came out on top. But other areas that we should note here are things like robotics, augmented and virtual reality, blockchain, and of course, biometrics. Continuing with digital and technology, another area which has had major growth in terms of technology and sales is the travel industry. And clearly, technology has opened up huge opportunities to the travel industry and luxury travel, of course, and made the whole ecosystem better. So just really to highlight the sheer weight and importance that digital has in terms of travel retail, we can see in the chart here that in regions like Australasia, North America and Western Europe, online is now greater than offline. But as new technologies make further inroads, the boundaries between digital and human are beginning to blur. So just looking at some examples here, as we saw earlier, biometrics is increasingly becoming disruptive. A number of airports already have face scanners in place. I'm sure if any one of you have been to Heathrow recently or Dubai Airport, you may have experienced the facial scanners. But of course, whilst this is great for security issues and saving time, luxury hospitality itself is using more innovation to enhance the in-house guest experience. So here we have quite an interesting example from a company called Agilicis, who basically provide technology or software for the hospitality industry. And they recently launched a new platform that uses facial recognition, which is used for returning guests. So obviously, the guest has to agree to be part of the project or within the system, but basically as the returning guest approaches the front desk, the system will obviously recognize them, will display their profile information at the reception desk. But overall, the idea is that this will allow for more personalized welcome and, above all, and most importantly, an improved customer experience. So this software can display things like or information saved about the guest, including like room preferences, food preferences, arrival and departure time, amongst many other things. It could be that this particular guest has certain dietary requirements. It could be that they are very familiar with the lifestyle of this guest, and they can offer other services that will make that stay more enjoyable, which ultimately will improve the overall guest experience and, ideally will also kind of increase revenue and guarantee that guest continues to use that hotel. So moving on to other areas, of course, another thing that we're seeing is the increase in blockchain. So maybe some of you have already heard about blockchain, but this is possibly an area, or looking at digital and really kind of wanting everything to be in one place. Blockchain could play a huge role in the future. For those of you that may not be familiar with blockchain, in its simplest form, blockchain is a digital platform where the information is stored as blocks and the database itself is the chain. The information is open for all to see, it's secure, it's traceable, it's unchangeable and transparent, hence its promise of trust. It is still very early days yet, but blockchain could be used for many applications, from something as simple as a payment platform, which we are seeing in the travel industry at the moment, but it could be used for much greater things, to trace a product across a whole supply chain. In terms of the luxury industry, we believe that this could be hugely disruptive as well as hugely positive when we question issues surrounding things like sustainability as well as authenticity. So looking at how this could possibly, or how this is already working in practice, we have an example here, which is precisely what De Beers is doing. So overall, De Beers has been making lots of waves across the industry, first of all with its synthetic diamonds, and now its new blockchain platform, which they've called Tracer. So the diamond industry overall has been notorious for failing in many areas over sustainability. But with this new technology, De Beers will be able to trace a diamond from its original mine to the end consumer. And moving forward, we believe that this will be rolled out further across the industry, but we also believe that many other luxury players will follow suit. So many of you may have already read recently in the news that LVMH are looking to create their own blockchain platform. So I mean, it's quite fascinating that I was at an event only a few months ago and asked the audience whether many people had heard about blockchain, and there were literally a handful of people that had heard about it, whereas now already we have the likes of LVMH moving into this area, which is quite fascinating. And last but not least, looking at the issue of experience. So I mentioned earlier that there's a fundamental shift taking place in consumer values towards experiences over actual luxury goods. Reaching the wealthy consumer can be tough, as I'm sure many of you working in the industry will know, not only owing to their global trotting lifestyle, but their general unique needs and needs of having unique experiences. So knowing what they want or even need is obviously even more of a challenge. But by going the extra mile to provide a service or experience that money can't buy is often the key to success. But moving forward, as competition intensifies, we believe that the survival of luxury brands will really depend on putting the customer service and, above all, the customer experience first. And I've just got quite a nice example here when it comes to experience. So here we have, this is an experience from within the travel industry. So here we have, it's a kind of, if you can call it a hotel, it's an open air hotel called Norwich Dam, which was set up by two concept artists, two Swiss artists called Frank and Patrick Rickling, if I can pronounce that properly. So they basically started this project. Initially, they started it somewhere in the Alps, where they had found a old disused Nazi bunker, which they thought might be interesting to open up and as a room of sorts, and people could spend a night in this bunker. That was hugely popular, so they actually thought, well, actually let's try something else. So they created this Norwich Dam hotel, which was ultimately a bed on top of the Swiss Alps. It initially started with just them as a relatively small project, but it became so popular that they handed it over to the Toggenburg Tourist Board in Switzerland, who have now rolled this out to become a much bigger project. So now they have 3 beds. So there's one which is right on top of the mountain, there's one which is kind of halfway down the mountain, and there's one which is next to the farm. Literally within minutes that the hotel goes online or bookings open up to the public, the nights, particularly the one on top of the Swiss Alps, is literally booked out within minutes of opening. Obviously, the other interesting thing here is the fact that the one on top of the hotel, one on top of the Alps, is obviously the one in greatest demand, just really highlighting that people really will flock from all over the world to have this experience in this bed on top of the Alps. So it just kind of highlights the extremes that people will go to. And really just to highlight also that for companies looking towards the experience trend, whilst obviously it's not only the younger consumers that are into the whole experience thing, they probably do need to be mindful of the fact that this is predominantly driven by the younger generations. So first and foremost, Millennials are the second largest generation in terms of population, but they will continue to be the most influential consumer segment moving forward. And although India and China are home to the largest millennial populations, as we can see in the chart here, their average overall incomes are far greater in North America and Western Europe. Another thing we also need to note is that these consumers approach luxury in very different ways, and they have different ideas about what it means to be a luxury good, but also the way they want to engage with it is also very different. Crucially, again, the concept of luxury as a status symbol is being replaced by that as a status experience. So just to conclude, one thing is clear, and that's the luxury industry is changing. Millennial spending power is increasing, brand loyalty is diminishing, and technologies are constantly changing. The key to future success is to keep evolving, as digital is never a done deal. Unique luxury services and products that offer a sustainable angle will be key, and demand for greater personalization is also set to grow, as well as the need to create emotional connections with consumers. Other strategies will include things like providing seamless omnichannel, authenticity, exclusive experiences that money can't buy, and promoting health and wellness. And whilst the technologies that we looked at during this presentation may be disruptive, they will all help to improve personalization, which ultimately helps to improve the customer journey. And last but not least, establishing and maintaining empathy will increase in importance. Millennials in particular want open and honest communication. But as luxury becomes more engaging, authentic, and personal, the human element has never been more important. As many experts now say, automate the predictable so that you can harmonize the exceptional. Thank you very much. So I think we can open up to some questions, if anyone has any questions.
Fflur,
hi.
Hi. I think you have some question in the Q&A box.
Okay, so here we go. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, how many? Sorry. So the first question I can see: does the industry generally trust the information that they are given by packaging suppliers, or are they worried about greenwash? I think generally there is a feeling that companies can't always be trusted, even though they may have certification to suggest that they are all of the things that they claim to be. I think this is an area where, positive luxury or having the butterfly logo kind of really helps brands to obviously, I know your question here is about packaging, but overall, I think this is where, obviously not just positive luxury, but having other kind of groups that are honest and reputable, that consumers do trust. So let's say a product does have the butterfly logo on it, then people will believe that that the product is honest, and what it's saying or making its claims, what they are, is actually true. But I think overall there are concerns about what goes on really in the world of luxury and packaging. So we have a question here from Joanna. How many of the eco-conscious consumers are luxury consumers? We don't have any, I don't have stats to date or to hand. We have carried out some consumer surveys on kind of the consumer survey we carried about the conscious or the eco-conscious consumer was more kind of just global consumers overall across all ages and demographics. It could be that we do have that narrowed down more to wealth groups or certain demographics, but from my experience, I would say that a good 60 to 70% of the luxury consumers, or maybe even more so, are more eco-conscious. I think the thing with the luxury consumer is that maybe unlike a consumer that doesn't have as much disposable income or access to goods, they may have harder decisions to make. So a family might only be able to afford fast fashion. They might only be able to shop in the likes of Primark or other kind of fast fashion retailers, whereas a luxury consumer or a wealthier consumer has access to, or that they have the luxury of being able to make those choices about buying a luxury product which is completely sustainable over maybe something which is less sustainable but cheaper. So I think that's kind of really important moving forward, and I think that's really also where maybe the luxury industry needs to help to educate these companies that sell their products much cheaper but maybe aren't as sustainable in doing so. In terms of receiving copies of the slides, I think that's something that Claudia will have to answer. Is that something that we can share, Claudia?
Hi, we will share the video with all the attendees and even those who can not attend. So we'll share the video. We'll make sure to share the video.
I have another question here about the luxury industry in Africa. So Africa, well, in particular sub-Saharan Africa, we do believe it's growing. It's probably one of the fastest growing regions, but it's growing from a very, very small base. So a few years ago, we were really excited about, in particular, Sub-Saharan Africa. We do look at South Africa as a market, and then aside from that, we look at UAE. Obviously, that's more kind of Middle East. But overall, we believe that it will be a few years yet before we really see any, in terms of the luxury industry overall, that we see any major kind of sales coming out of Africa. Growth is huge, tourism is huge, and the luxury tourism industry is growing very well over there, particularly when we look at things like safari or anything to do with wellness and being outdoors. I think that's an area where we're seeing huge growth in Africa, but the luxury industry overall, I think it has quite a lot of, has quite a way to go. I think aside from the issue of spending power and wealth, there are other major issues and obstacles I think that the industry will have to overcome before they can really kind of see any major impact coming out of the region. Going to the issue of sustainability, I think that's another really interesting area to look at in terms of luxury travel in Africa, with things like we saw earlier about the slide I showed about animals becoming extinct. So we have these wonderful safaris that really, and the luxury safaris, or these luxury hotels where you're literally sleeping, you're up in the trees, you're kind of sleeping or bathing amongst the trees, literally, which is wonderful. But if the biodiversity or the animals that people go to see in these wonderful areas, if they start to die out, then obviously that's going to have a huge impact on the industry overall, on the travel industry. And a lot of these areas that may be very poor, so they really do rely very heavily on the luxury industry. So I think when we look at sustainability, it really is it's really within their interest to make sure that they're looking after, or they are being sustainable, and they're being completely mindful about everything that they do, for the well-being and the welfare of these areas. So, sorry, we have another. How do you think these changes will impact the way luxury brands use marketing and communication as a sales tool? I think I think more and more brands need to celebrate if they are sustainable. I think they need to celebrate their models or their social responsibility models. I mean, there's lots of cases where maybe consumers don't know about the sustainability or the sustainable business models that companies have in place. And I think that's something that they need to communicate, but also maybe they need to educate consumers maybe more as well about the way that they do business. I mean, for a long time, diamonds have had such an awful reputation, but actually, the biggest groups like De Beers, for example, the diamond groups, they have been crucial to bringing money into those areas. And these big diamond groups, for example, they have not been involved in these so-called blood diamonds or any of the kind of the negative impact that diamonds have had, and they've actually been very positive in that they've brought money to these villages, they've opened schools, they've opened hospitals, they've helped to build communities that otherwise would be living on nothing. And it's obviously it's a two-way relationship, but I think in those cases I think it's important that these brands do communicate this and celebrate these. So the fact that De Beers, as I showed earlier, has come up with the blockchain platform called Tracer, that that really will help to educate consumers and make them feel more comfortable about buying diamonds. So I think actually, sorry, Claudia, do we have any time for any more questions?
It's up to you, Fflur, if you have time. Otherwise, we can just tell me.
Okay, so wait a minute. I'm just going to blockchain initiatives in the fashion industry. So hello, do you have any blockchain initiatives in the fashion industry except from LVMH? And what is the sense it will be disruptive? So I mentioned earlier that De Beers has launched their blockchain platform called Tracer, which means that basically if you go to De Beers and you want to buy one of their diamonds, it means that as a consumer, you can trace that diamond all the way back to the mine. In terms of, so you know that diamond is honest, it's come from a good source. You can see exactly the whole process that diamond, the whole journey that diamond has taken before you either wear that diamond or you gift that diamond. Similarly, once you then buy that diamond from De Beers, for example, you then take on the blockchain. So that information then is with you. So should you then decide to pass that diamond on to somebody else or to sell that diamond, whoever is buying that diamond from you also will be able to see, the journey that diamond has taken. So on the one hand, it helps the consumers to make decisions. On the other hand, let's say we're looking at the counterfeit market, for example. You go online and you don't know whether a product is genuine or not. If blockchain really kind of does roll out across the whole industry, then if you were to let's say you're selling a Louis Vuitton bag, for example, and you have the blockchain for that bag, then as a consumer, and I go online and I think, oh yes, I'd like to buy that bag, I can see whether that bag is genuine or not. So it will also help. So there's two ways it can help in terms of sustainability, in that consumers will be able to see that products come from a honest and ethical background. It will also help the counterfeit industry. So from that point of view, it'll help the overall industry. Or it's not to say that counterfeit won't exist anymore, but at least as a consumer, you can then make a decision whether you want to pay, maybe tie a bit more and know that that product is genuine, or know that you are buying a counterfeit good. But either way, the industry will become more transparent. So we have a question here. The slide around new luxury appealing to the younger consumer. How does luxury fashion fit in with this new experience economy? What is appealing to the younger consumer? So I think, in terms of experience, we're seeing it in terms of fashion. We're seeing it across every single angle, whether that's you shopping online, that you go onto a particular website, you want to have an experience of shopping. You don't want to just have a clunky old e-commerce website, which is very boring. You want that to be able to tell a story. So you want to be able to replicate the experience of going in the store and seeing the products as you, in the same way if you were to go online. So there's the online experience of actual shopping. Then we have the experience of actually going into a store, where consumers, more and more, unless they go into a store and they have an experience in that store, it's not enough. Consumers need, especially with the growth of digital, the consumers are becoming more demanding, especially younger consumers. So if they're actually going to leave their sofa and go to a store, then they want to know that actually it's going to be a really good experience, whether that's some interactive experience in the store, whether that's literally just the way the store is laid out, whether that's some other way that they bring in consumers into the store, whether that's a digital thing in the store. Another thing that we're seeing in terms of experience is, and again, this also possibly goes back to, well, it goes back to digital, but also maybe goes back to sustainability, that we're seeing a growth in subscription models. So we're seeing obviously the rental markets. So instead of actually maybe going out and buying a brand new Rolex or a brand new bag, you can have the experience of owning a bag or a watch for a limited time. So that's one area that we're seeing growth, but we're also seeing it in things like streets fashion or streetwear. So there's a company that's recently launched in the US, or it's from New York, and it literally just does streetwear. So, and again, this is very much to do with maybe the younger consumer that might buy some designer streetwear or street fashion. It's very Instagrammable, so therefore maybe a consumer will wear it for a month or something, and then they don't want it anymore, so they'll try to sell it online. So this company has come up with this great idea of having a subscription. So they rent out, it's called Renter, I think, and it's literally launching now in the US. So I think that's another thing that we're seeing in terms of experiences on the ownership or the experience of ownership and how that's changing. And again, that's particularly driven by maybe the younger consumer who maybe don't have the, first of all, maybe they don't have the income to necessarily buy a brand new Rolex watch, but they want to have the experience of wearing a Rolex watch or feeling, that the idea of having a Rolex watch. Or it simply might be that, they don't necessarily want to buy a Rolex watch. Even if they have the income, they want to wear lots of different things. So they might want to trial 10 different watches in a month. But this is something, again, that we're seeing across the board, even the car industry, for example. So I know that Porsche, they have a subscription model in the US. Volvo also have one, and I believe Bentley also have a subscription model. So again, you don't have to necessarily buy the new 911, the Carrera. You can actually just not loan it, but you rent it or have a subscription for it for a month, and then maybe the following month you actually want to see what the new Boxster's like. So again, I think it's the whole idea about ownership which is changing, and that's again all down to kind of the perception of ownership and our ideas as consumers about ownership is changing, that we want to have less things and less possessions and more experiences. So I think we probably maybe need to end there. If I can answer any questions on email, is that possible, Claudia?
Yes, absolutely. We will make sure to please attendees, send over every question you have, and we will answer them as soon as possible. If you want, just email us, and we'll make sure to answer the questions, every questions.
Okay, thank you. And thank you very much, everyone, for listening and joining us today. As I said, we're very excited about this new platform called The Circle. We'll definitely be listening to all of the future webinars. And as Claudia said, if you do have any questions or any further questions, regardless of from today's session, if there's anything else that you would like to ask, please don't hesitate to get in touch. We'll be more than happy to help and talk more about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fflur. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.